Namaskar. Before starting this session, I would again request all the participants to kindly put their mic on mute so that we can have a smooth and uninterrupted session. I welcome you all to our last session of ALEK, our workshop on the art of article writing. As you all know, this session would deal with academic article writing. The learned speakers will cover various aspects of academic article writing, such as what it entails, how it is different from other types of article writing, the research methodology to be employed, its structure, format, etc. This session would also throw light upon issues regarding publication, choosing appropriate journal, common errors, and the importance of reviewing a journal's editorial policy. This session would be held in two parts, as I've already told. We'll have a joint question answer session, which would be held after conclusion of discourse by both the speakers. So the participants are requested to put their questions in the chat box, and I will take those questions accordingly. For our concluding session, we have two very distinguished guests with us, Professor Ranjan Kumar Ghosh and Professor Yogesh Pai. Professor Ranjan Kumar Ghosh is an assistant professor at the decorated Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Sir holds a PhD in economics from Humboldt University, Berlin, Germany, and has also worked as an assistant professor at the Department of Economics, SLU, Uppsala, Sweden, and has been a visiting scholar at the Vincent and Eleanor Ostrom Workshop in Political Theory and Policy Analysis, Indiana University, Bloomington, USA. Sir has various published articles in his name in national as well as international journals, ranging from Journal of South Asian Development, Journal of Developmental Studies, IGI Global, International Journal of Climatic Change, Strategies in Management, to International Journal of Ecological Economics and Statistics. He is also a reviewer for Energy Policy, Journal of Cleaner Production, International Journal of the Commons, Sustainability, Utilities Policy, to name a few. To enumerate Sir's illustrious academic background in such a short period of time is impossible. We welcome you, sir. Our second speaker for today's session is Professor Yogesh Pai. Sir is an assistant professor at the esteemed National Law University, Delhi. Sir specializes in intellectual property law. He is currently the co-director of Center for Innovation, Intellectual Property and Competition at the National Law University, Delhi. Sir is the Thomas Edison Fellow for the year 2017-18 at the George Mason University, Washington, D.C., USA. Sir has been a visiting scholar at the School of Law, University of Washington as well. Sir has published in national and international journals like Oxford Journal of Antitrust Enforcement, Journal of World Intellectual Property, Journal of Indian Law Institute, to name a few. Sir also has book chapter published with Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, etc. Sir has also worked with various ministries on national issues. On behalf of Think India, I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Ranjan Kumar Ghosh to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Drishti, for this very generous introduction. I don't think I even half deserve it, but really, gives me enthusiasm to interact with so many, and unfortunately faceless, but fortunately very, potent future potential researchers and leaders of our country. So I'll just, share in the next 15 minutes or so my experience in the field of research and how the entire publication process is central to that. So how a researcher's life is tied around that and why it is so important and how we can crack it. So just, broadly, this is what I'll do. I hope, I can be heard clearly and seen for who wants to see. So
Yes,
okay, good. So I don't have a PPT, unfortunately, if maybe Yogesh has, but I hope that's okay. So all the questions you can throw in the chat box and probably we'll take that later in the joint Q&A. So let me begin by saying that academic writing is very different from journalistic or other forms of novelistic creative writing. So the creativity in academic writing comes from the science part, comes from the methodology, comes from the concept. Uh, it is, so it's just the opposite of what usually, let's say, the prose kind of writing we are used to or we see going around, like an author who is writing a novel, or a journalist, where creativity in writing is extremely important. Here, the basic fundamental, idea of scientific writing is to explain your very creative ideas, because you are producing knowledge. You see, what a scientist does, whether it's a physical scientist or a social scientist, what a scientist does is to create knowledge. So we are all in the business of knowledge production. So we have, various types of production, manufacturing, services, on which the economy runs. But we are in the business, academicians, in the business of scientific knowledge production. So in a very famous book, Thomas Kuhn, a Princeton mathematician and a philosopher, I think the name of the book was Logic of Scientific Discovery, or maybe that was Popper, or it was the theory of scientific revolutions, either one of them. I just got confused for the moment. So Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, if you look him up, he defines what is normal science. So he says normal science, or what we understand normally science, is what most of the scientists do all the time, and what all the scientists do most of their times. So this is what Kuhn defines as normal science. And then he says that there is a once in a while there is a paradigm shift where there is such a revolutionary scientific idea which comes and changes the trajectory in which our scientific world, whether it's again physical science or social science or other forms of scholarly world, it changes only once in a while. But this happens in in a few decades. That doesn't happen very frequently. So what happens very frequently is normal science. So we are all in the process of normal science. That is, we're doing what most of the scientists do all the time, and all the scientists do most of the time. So what is the core here? The core here is to express those creativity, to express those ideas in very simple, very direct language. So the language here doesn't get a life or a personality of its own. So compare this with prose writing, compare this with storytelling, compare this with probably journalistic writing, which in modern times, of course, it has become more fictional than it was originally meant to be. But fictional writing is where the language has its own life, the language has its own personality. Not to say that scientific writing doesn't have its personality, but it does not let its personality come in the way of communicating science, communicating the idea. So it's a very dutiful, let's say, quote unquote, servant of the idea, right? So scientific writing is about preciseness, is about directness, it's about terseness, it's about conciseness, it's about succinctness, comprehensiveness, coherence, relevance, and easy readability. I would say these are the words in which a scientific writer should keep in mind. It should be very easily readable. If you open up, most of you are undergraduate or postgraduate students and probably want to take up a career in research going forward. The most famous journals are Nature family of journals, Science. Nowadays, of course, these medicine journals are very popular. For example, Lancet. They're of course very big journals, but they are more popular in in public's imagination because of the current COVID situation. So these are very big journals. If you open them up, if you pick up any random Nature article, you will see, even as an undergraduate or postgraduate student, or even as a layman, you may not be a scientific, you may not be a medical scientist working in the lab, you may not be a modeler, dealing with complex models, or a physicist, but you will be able to understand what is going on to a great extent. Even if not 100%, you may not be able to understand the method part completely, the technical part completely, but the essence you will get, even though these are coming from very, tough, years and years of work. That is what scientific writing does. It makes it very easily readable. It makes it concise. Even for a layman, the core idea should be possible. Now, you may think that, oh, so scientific writing, of course, is the easiest. That is what, comes out from this. It doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have its own, it doesn't come in its way. It's simple, precise, no fancy words, nothing. So very easy. Because what is tough? Tough is to come with, fluffy language. Tough is to come up with, imaginative, words which convey very complex, phenomena like fiction or non-fiction kind of, writers, authors, and they're great with that, and that's an extraordinary skill. But one should not underestimate that this is an easy task. In fact, for those who have dealt with both the sides of the world in terms of writing for popular writing, let's say we call it popular writing, the other side, and this one is scientific writing, I would bet that most of them would say that scientific writing is hardest. Why it is hardest, why it is so hard, is because it has to be very simple. And it has to be very simple and yet complex, and yet convey very, very complex ideas. Very complex ideas in a simple manner. So this is very tough. So therefore, scientific writing in itself, is a very serious subject matter, which one should be aware of, one should know the nuances of, but then, one should also be aware that this takes a lot of practice, a lot of time to develop. But nonetheless, this is very much possible. And even if you're a very good scientist, you're a very good scholar, you're a very good social scientist and economist. I am generally from, I publish in economics journals. I'm an economist by training, but I'm also very interdisciplinary. So I work with various kinds of other disciplines, and I work mostly in policy. So, based in economics, but mostly in social science and, policy level work, which at least aims to influence policy. So I can say that it is extremely, extremely difficult. And it took me years and years to understand that writing well and conveying your idea is, if not more important, but as important as your body of the real work. Therefore, it has to be taken very, very seriously from as early as possible, right? So one has to differentiate and understand that, in this scientific or academic world, we are dealing with what is known as positivism. So there are two things. If you move forward, many of you may already know, there are two things. One is a normative writing, and one is a positive writing. Normative science, a normative views, normative approach, and there is a positive approach. Now, what is this? This positive here in the world of science doesn't mean, positive. Yeah, enthusiasm, be positive. You can achieve anything in life. No, that is not the kind of positivity or positivism we are, alluding to. What in scientific world, what positivism means, or positive research, positive idea means, is that you explain what is. You talk about what is. You talk about facts. You talk about phenomena. You don't take an opinion. Don't make opinions. You're not an opinion maker. You're a reporter of facts. You do some experiments. You do some tests. You do some research. You just express the facts as they are. You express the world. You try to decode the world as it is. What is normative? You express the world as it should be. There you bring your opinions. There you bring your views. Of course, a scientist can always be normative, but scientist is very clear where he or she is positive and when he and she is normative. Usually a scientist will be normative at the end of their entire scientific work, and they will say that, look, this is what we have found the world to be. This is what, so for example, we have the COVID-19 disease, which is by SARS-CoV-2 virus, the novel coronavirus. So what a scientist will do is scientists will report how the virus behaves, right? That is what the scientist's job is. That is what their writing will convey. That's it. It will not make any normative stand. This virus is good, bad, this disease or what is happening in the world is right or wrong or what. There is no should be in a scientist's life, at least in the beginning part. At the end, they can make an opinion. They can, give some kind of their opinion. That is normative. So one has to be very careful that when it's writing scientific, one has to be very positive in one's approach. Just asking the why question or the how question and reporting and explaining that, and that's it. Right? No views, no should be, only what is. So that's the first principle. Second, we have to understand that there is largely what is called scientists should take an epistemological view. So what is science in simple terms is you can there is a worldview out there. You have a belief about how the world operates. That is that's a more philosophical point. I won't go too much into details of that. That is about the ontological view of the world, the ontology. That is, how is the world? The world is you believe that this is a world which can be corrected. This is a world which can be governed. This is a world which has its life, which follows some cycles. That's your ontology. Then your epistemology is what kind of approach you used. I'm using very simple terms. These are very deep philosophical concepts or constructs. So epistemology is basically, what is your approach towards understanding that ontology, that worldview? Right? That's epistemology. A consistency between this is called scientism or science. Right? So there is a broad epistemological view in the last 100 years or 200 years is, in terms of when we say science, we are generally alluring to this positive epistemological approach, which says that, okay, what is the core idea? And I am not saying, and let me put a disclaimer before I move forward, and I'm not saying that this is the only way to understand science. This is the only way, we should approach science, or we can approach science. And that this is a primarily Western-driven, scientific world we are living in. And I'm not saying that that is the only way in which the world can be understood, or that is the only epistemology which is correct, or which should one adhere to. There are multiple epistemologies. But I'm saying that whether we like it or not, at the moment, this is how the worldview is. And to establish yourself in the world of science, this is very important to understand. And then, of course, you bring in multiple views. You bring in the non-colonial perspectives. Because at the end of the day, science is also a very, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but science is also political in nature. We have to understand that. There is a history of science. There is a politics of science. It is largely a colonial-driven, a phenomena. But, that's a topic for discussion some other time. But, we have to understand how this operates. And, we have to understand the nuances of how to be successful in this. So, once you know that we are in the world of positive science, which is basically driven towards constructing hypothesis, right? And testing it, primarily, whether it's social science. I'm not talking about legal sciences here. Yogesh ji will explain in details that has a very different approach. But I'm talking about primarily in economics, positive social sciences and physical sciences, almost universally. They are, largely driven by hypothesis testing, which means you come up with a construct, a theoretical construct or a framework, a theoretical framework. You come up with variables. You identify, a problem, which you call it as an explained factor, or something which you want, a dependent variable, a dependent factor, which you want to explain. And then you use, a set of variables. You can use a quantitative method or a qualitative method. That's a different thing. That's a very specific, narrowed agenda. We are not talking about that, and it doesn't matter. But what matters is that you're trying to explain a phenomena. You're trying to give reasons for why that phenomena exists, right? And to do that, you create a set of hypotheses that X leads to Y, right? Or X1 leads to Y1. Because of this, we observe this phenomena. That's a hypothesis testing. So, for example, again, in the COVID-19 situation, a hypothesis could be, what is the reaction of the novel coronavirus to temperature treatments? So then the hypothesis which you will create, giving a very simplistic example, but very real example, is that as temperatures will increase, or as we go towards tropical conditions, the virus will lose its virility, the virus will become weak. So therefore, the hypothesis is that with increasing temperature, the virus will lose its vigor or rigor. The virus will become weak. That is a hypothesis. X leads to Y. That hypothesis is what you will pick up, and then you will try to test that either in laboratory conditions or in real world conditions, in a social science framework or in a physical science framework. You will try to test that hypothesis using a lot of experimental data. You will bombard, you will test under many conditions using a lot of large data at many of the times with hundreds and thousands of people across conditions. You will control for so many factors, and then you will be able to say, oh my God, in reality, temperature doesn't seem to have too much effect on the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. So your hypothesis, which you initially set up, turned out to be, false. So an important thing about hypothesis creation is that there has to be an element of falsifiability, which means an hypothesis should not be a statement. It can be proved or disproved. It cannot be a statement. I do not like SARS-CoV-2 virus, or SARS-CoV-2 virus is problematic to the world. These are statements, right? You cannot disprove them. Of course, these are facts. So you have to understand, when you create a hypothesis, it has to be falsifiable. It can be falsified. It can be true. It can be false. So you say increasing temperature will weaken the virus. That is a hypothesis, because that can be proved false also. So falsifiability is a very important factor, and that is the core of science in the modern world as we understand scientific work. Okay. Now, once you have done that, once you have tested a hypothesis, what you do is you start off by expressing, and you want to communicate that, and that is where writing becomes extremely important. And I'll just take 5 or 6 more minutes. Is writing becomes very important. Is you have to express that very, very clearly and very short. So first thing you start doing is you think of a title. When you want to write a paper, an academic paper, the first thing is, now once you have done this hypothesis testing, you have done your lab studies on this particular example, you think of a title. That title should be very short, clear, and should be able to cover and give a sense to the reader. So that's the first challenge you will have to overcome. The second challenge, step 2, after you've done the title, is, or the title could be, for example, I'm just thinking off my head, the title could be effects of heat conditions on the novel coronavirus. It has to be very clear in what your paper contains. It cannot be some fluffy stuff. Then next will be the most challenging part, is writing an abstract, because abstract is a very short summary of your entire paper. So your paper will be 8,000, 9,000 words on an average, or 10,000 words. You will have to write an abstract, a short summary, in at the max in major journals, 200 words. So in 200 words, you have to express your entire idea, because if you do not express and if you do not impress your readers in those 200 words along with the title, your paper is dead. You may have done fantastic work. You may have come up with the best results possible on how to understand the coronavirus, but nobody is going to read your paper. Nobody is going to accept your paper if your title and abstract is not to the point. So abstract writing is the most important exercise which you have to start learning to do, and this is where it makes it very different from essay writing. So what we do in the non-research world is we write essays, right? That's exposition of your ideas. You go on and on, express in many ways. No, it's just the reverse here. It is abstract, very precise, very short, kind of no nonsense, very tactfully written. So therefore, writing short, writing precise is what the exercise you have to start beginning if you want to become researchers. Because if you do not, succeed in the title and abstract phase, gone. Your entire research career is a waste. Your entire research paper is a waste. Okay, so very important. Abstract writing. Then you go and you have certain basic structures which I'm sure you can pick up any journal article and you'll see. You have an introduction section where you give a larger summary, you introduce, you excite, you excite the readers. So another formula I'll give you, when you want to excite your readers in scientific writing, your title, abstract, and the first part of your introduction should create the O factor. You know what is the O? O is like, oh, so is this a problem? So you have to create that O factor, that problem. You have to excite the reader. Oh my God, this coronavirus can potentially, finish half of the population. So your introduction will be like that this novel coronavirus is potentially so dangerous that it can, and so contagious that it can finish up half of the world. And the reader is, oh my God. Then that attracts the attention of the reader, right? Then you go ahead, you introduce the entire topic, you summarize a little bit of what you have done, then you go to your materials, methods, methodology, or your theory. You start with a theory framework, you explain what is the theory saying, what are the several theories, what I've said, and their literature review becomes extremely important. So you have to review the literature of existing work, because you have to make sure that you're not repeating some work. How do you know in this mad complex world where every minute a new research is being published, that your research, which you think is Nobel Prize winning, is path breaking, is a revolutionary in the Kuhn's world of paradigm shift, you think every work you do is a paradigm shift? No. Maybe 10 other people have done it. How do you know that you're making? So to ensure that you're making a fine marginal contribution, a small contribution to a large body of literature, you have to do a literature review, very thorough literature review, to ensure that you have not missed out on what others have said. And then you will bring different perspectives. XYZ researchers have said this about this particular topic. ABC researchers have said this about this particular topic. You will review 20-25 papers. You will say, this is the world view in present, but this is what they're missing. So much research has happened, but they have not looked at the effect of heat conditions on this novel coronavirus, a novel virus. So our paper is making this contribution. And then, the reader is saying, oh, okay, this is another interesting thing. Then you explain your methodology, then you explain your materials, methods. That's a more technical part, which we should not talk about it, because that varies so much according to different disciplines. And you will get to know when as you move forward. Then you say that you have adopted, and then of course, before the methodology, at the end of your literature review theory, you present your hypothesis. This is the hypothesis. Then in the methodology, you say that this is how we have tested it. And then you present the results. Then when you present the results and discussion, there should be the aha factor. So you start with the O factor, right? And then you end with the aha. So this is how the virus behaves. So this is the behavior. This is the nature. If you treat it, this is how it behaves with different heat and tropical and temperature and climatic conditions. Aha. So now you have learned something new, right? So you have to give that aha factor at the end of the paper, right, of your research. So you have to start. So you follow this as your normal process. Normally this is what happens. So it's very important to do all of this. You have to be at each stage, you have to be very precise, very conscious, very conscientious. So this is the gist of what your writing should look like. Just to the point, able to excite the reader, create an interest, initially create an O factor, end with an aha factor. No normativity, no opinions, fact, positive, just reporting, but very rigorous, based on results, based on lot of data, based on years probably of lab work, or testing human subjects, social science research, whatever, ethnography or regressions or econometrics or statistics, all of that, rigorous. And you say that, look, and then when you present your results, you have to present with a lot of caution. So usually you will see at the end of research papers, they write about the limitations of their work. They provide a caution. It's not like an author, a writer, that, the world is, their oyster. So it's fiction. It's imagination. It can go anywhere. It can go to the black hole. It can go to beyond universe. It's all imagination. Here, no. You just stick to the facts, and then you say, this is the limit. This is what we have achieved. Very simple, 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 points we have achieved under very tough conditions, controlling for so many other factors. But at the end, you also say these are the limitations. We could not cover X, Y, Z points, and you have to be humble, you have to be modest, and you have to convey everything with a pinch of salt, right? Hopefully the WHO and the Lancet journals, would have followed them, we hope, but we don't know what's going on in recent times. But they have very high standards, but this whole pandemic is a very unique situation, so we can understand that there may have been bloops, but this is what usually scientists do. Okay, so once you have done that, the last 3 points is you have to identify a journal where you want to publish. Now that will be dependent on your hypothesis. That will depend on the literature you have done, review you have done. So once you do the literature review, it will tell you which kind of journal is most interested in this kind of research. Talking about journals and publication process is a very different subject matter. We can go hours and hours about that, so we will not do that. I'll hand over to Yogesh in another couple of minutes. But more important thing is that journals, journals is a mafia, is a world in itself, right? So there are predatory journals which run purely on business models, and then there are very scientific reputed journals. So in your own fields, you have to talk to your senior researchers, and this is an understanding which you gain by experience in terms of understanding which are the good journals, where you should not publish, because once you publish in those places, your career is over. Maybe you publish less, but you have to publish in good journals, relevant journals, where people will read and cite your work. So there are many metrics to understand which is a good journal: cite scores, impact factors, scopus, and all kinds of reputation factors. But these are very disciplined subjective. You have to identify good journals. You have to pitch in that. You have to tailor your work and writing again to the journal editors, to the journal reviewers, to the journal readers, and that's very tricky, because that will be eventually reviewed by, in good journals, they're reviewed by, peer reviewed by scientists or researchers in your field, whom you won't know, and they also won't know who you are. So this is not it's a very tough world. It's a very tough world. So they can be extremely tough because they don't know who you are, and you will never know who they are. So they may be a person sitting right next to you, maybe your best friend, but you may not know. So they'll be very, very tough. They will review it thoroughly. They'll be very brutal. So that is the gold standard of doing good work, because it is not validated by you or your friends, but it is validated by, let's say, quote unquote, your enemy. You don't even know. If it passes that, the Agni Pariksha. So peer review is literally the Agni Pariksha of after all what you have done. If it passes that, then you get comments, you revise them, you work them, you make your so usually my papers, I tell you, I start with versions. So I named it. For example, I just published recently a paper on land use policy, which is a very high impact factor, good journal in our field. So so for that paper, for example, it was on land acquisition. So in land acquisition, blah blah blah, version 01. This was 3 or 4 years back. Now when I submitted it to the journal and in the process, it was probably version 35 or 36. So many iterations you have to go through. So you have to be very, very patient. You should never make editors or reviewers your enemies, because generally they are not. They want to ensure that your work is very good, understandable. So you have to take that, all of this. So I think with this, at the end only I will say that this is a very tough process, but it really makes you very sharp. So you have to be very you have to take this very positively, because if nothing, it is going to give you a very clear sense of things. When you look at the world, your worldview becomes very sharp. You develop a very tremendous ability to express yourself in very short writing with short words, and interest your readers and give them some scientific knowledge in a very easy manner. So thank you very much. I'm very sorry that I stepped myself I think 8 or 9 minutes beyond my brief time I was given. So apologies for that. I'm getting some questions, and we will take those questions together in the Q&A session after Yogesh has spoken. Thank you very much. Over to you, Yogesh.
Thank you so much, sir. I have to say that it was, in fact, a very enticing and grasping session. I was just rigorously jotting down everything that you were saying, and I have to say that I have gotten a few good quotes to use elsewhere. Sir, you spoke profusely about scientific writing, and you also shed light on the core of scientific writing, that it is to express creativity and ideas in simple and direct, in the most direct ways. And today I think all of us are going with the quote that simple is the new tough. So thank you so much for that, sir. We also discussed what all are the different approaches are there to go about a scientific writing. We have normative approach, then we have positive approach. We have hypothesis testing, conclusions, we have the ooh factor, we have the ah factor, and so on. So thank you very much, sir. I'm sure that we'll have a very interesting question answer session as well. Now, moving forward, I would like to invite Professor Yogesh Pai to kindly take over and deliver his discourse. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Hello, am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
I don't know why I'm not able to, upload or share my PPT from the, link that is here.
So we'll just look into it.
Now you can share, sir. Now you can share.
I think, yes, now I can share. Yes. Cool. This is working?
So we can see it.
Yeah, wonderful. So thank you very much, Drishti, and thank you, Ganesh, Think India. I think the ground has been very well set. In fact, there would be a lot of overlap between what Professor Ranjan ji has discussed and what I'm going to do. However, we will try and see what kind of specific things you can keep in mind while doing legal research, for example, and I'll cite some of the things that we do. I understand that a significant proportion of the audience has some kind of a legal background, or they are studying their law or doing their postgraduate courses. Now, the reason I prepared PPT was because I had to make sure that I make all the points that are necessary, that I think are necessary. But a good friend of mine always said, Yogesh, if you don't have a PPT, you can make powerful points. So I think Ranjanji has made a lot of powerful points, and PowerPoint or powerful points. The discussion on this is actually something that matters a lot, and the reason it matters a lot is because academic writing does not rely on your feelings. This is the first thing that we should all know. Facts, they don't care for your feelings. So many of you or some of us, when we have gone through our careers, we had a particular opinion, and maybe because of indoctrination, or maybe because of the worldviews that we have, a kind of subjective attachment towards a particular set of facts, and seeking particular outcomes, we tend to sort of write whatever we do, a thesis or an essay or even an article, in the way in which we think things are. But maybe the things are not the way they are. So how do you discover facts, and how do you expose those facts and contribute your own set of what you call explanations to those facts? That is what academic writing does. Now, academic writing in many ways is not fictional writing then. So people, you have great authors who write about what you call taking characters from mythology and writing an entirely new book. That is not academic writing. Academic writing is also not popular writing. For example, writing autobiographies. I think Professor Ranjan has very well mentioned the distinction between what we call academic writing and what is non-academic writing. So academic writing relies heavily on, it's a part of non-fiction, and relies heavily on facts and the exposition of facts towards reaching a particular conclusion based on that, based on what you see and derive from the logic. Now, but what is wrong today with academic writing? There is a lot of gibberish that goes on in academic writing, and being an academic, I have I'm completely honest in saying that this happens quite a lot, and it happens quite a lot because of a lot of things. See, there is a beautiful book written by Steven Pinker in 2014. I think the name is The Sense of Writing, or The Sense of Style, something to that effect. And what he says is, why is it that in a profession like academia and those who write academic stuff, scholars, why do they tend to make this prose unnecessarily terse, unnecessarily obscure, unpleasant to read? Why is it? Why is it impossible to understand? And this feeling comes from our recent COVID phenomena, wherein every day some of us who are interested in knowing, for example, for how long does the virus stay on the on a particular surface, and we tend to Google, and today it's so accessible that an open access article may be available on the web, and yet we are not able to make head and tail out of it, not even by reading the abstract. So if that is the situation wherein there is complexity in the writing, why is it that a profession that is the academic profession, meant to actually fill in a knowledge gap, as Professor Ranjan mentioned, and to contribute something new and be creative, why is it that we are doing so? So he found out that there are two views about this. People outside the academy, they say that it's a deliberate choice because these people have nothing to say, and they sometimes they tend to dress up trivial and obvious things, and draw a kind of paper that is filled with sophistication, and he uses the word hoping to bamboozle their audiences with high faultian gobbledygook. So so essentially what he's saying is, the view outside the academy in the general public is that perhaps the little that we tend to contribute, or we think is a contribution, outside the academy people think that it is too trivial and obvious. That may be the one of the reasons. However, inside the academy there is an explanation, and inside the academy people think that academic writing is difficult because some of the things are unavoidable. So for example, if I have to write about patents, and I have to write about pharmaceutical patents, I have to write about biotechnology patents, then I presume that the audience that I have necessarily understands what a patent is, so that I don't need to mention what a patent is, and I don't need to give the basics of what is the overall legal framework. So people would generally then pick up on what is the new contribution. And the view from the academy is that every time you cannot provide these descriptions in your papers, which go into pages and pages of what patents are, and then coming to your research question. So there is this complexity that is at the level in which academics write, because they don't want to sound very repetitive, and also sometimes very trivial, because explaining what is already known to the audience is is futile. Having said that, what is also happening is that there is a culture that is being now drawn, wherein it doesn't happen so much in India, from what I understand, but foreign, in countries, especially in Europe and in the United States, require you to have a non-technical abstract of your paper. Especially for your thesis, your PhD thesis, they require a non-technical. And what is this non-technical abstract? This is directed towards general public. If you want to say what you have contributed, and it can only be explained to a few number of people and not to the larger public, then one of the objectives of research is completely redundant, because research is meant to convey to the least common denominator also. So keeping in mind, there are these midway solutions that people are developing to have non-technical abstracts and the like. But what, when we want to write about, say, when we want to do a research paper of 8 to 10,000 words, how do we know that there is some problem? The first thing is, we should mind our knowledge gap. Because there are knowledge gaps, there are learning gaps. What if we do not know what we don't know? And this is a very, dangerous place to be. Because if you know that you don't know something, then you can always learn it, or you can account for those limitations in your research, right? But if you do not know what you don't know, then the best way perhaps is to read and read before you start writing. So explore the various dimensions of your research and see, what you are thinking of in terms of a problem, the materials that you have collected on, that closely fits into it. So if you will first start reading generally and then get on to more specifics. And there is an art of reading. Sometimes the reason why abstracts are important are precisely for this. Because if you read the abstract of 200 words, you should be able to understand, that a particular article is hinting or coming up with a particular idea. And by reading so many abstracts, perhaps you can, try and narrow down your what you call materials, and then, start reading those, compartmentalized or specific materials to a greater degree. But then the first and the most important thing after reading is then to find a problem. Now, it shouldn't be a case that you are trying to fix what isn't broken or what is not a problem. So how do we know? Now, there is this classic what you call trolley problem in moral philosophy, wherein the complexity of the issue is that one man is standing there, a man or a woman is standing there with a lever, and there is a train that is approaching. Now he has the option of either turning the lever and letting it go towards a little right, or just not turning the lever and letting the 5 people die. So between 1 and 5, what is the option for that particular person who is operating the lever? Now, these are very complex moral questions. All questions that we want to, research on are not so complex, or maybe they are complex, but they are not so big that, we would have to, constantly bicker around, what choices to make. Because in the, narrow, what you call field of our research, we definitely can keep into account the various variables, control for those variables, and then look into what best can be achieved within those set of circumstances. Now, this trolley problem is a classic problem, that cannot be solved, because then there is a fight between people who are utilitarians, who would say that killing 1 is better than killing 5, but then the deontologists and the people who are people who base their arguments on principles would say that killing 1 life also is a problem, and then you are putting a value to 1 life vis-a-vis 5 life is not a good way of handling things. So these problems sometimes cannot be, but not all problems are like that. For example, let me give you a simple example from legal research. Okay, now one of the things that happens in legal research is I just got distracted because I got a notification, sorry. One of the things that happens in legal research is to identify whether the court has arrived at the right ratio. Okay, in arriving at the particular ratio, the court has reasoned it properly, and court has referred to all the primary and the secondary sources of what you call legal endeavor. So in doing so, there can be a situation where the court has misinterpreted a particular decision. The court has picked and chosen one decision over the other. The court has not kept in mind the principle of stare decisis, for example, wherein precedents are to be given value, and only in a narrow set of circumstances where you have a differentiating kind of situation could the court neglect stare decisis. So all those things would have to be kept in mind while trying to see whether you have a research problem, particularly in law or not. Now, legal research as it is does not always I'm not able to does not always direct at courts. Okay, now then the important factor is who is your audience. Sometimes the audience is basically your own peer group. Okay, your own peer group, your academic circle, sometimes the audience is the courts, sometimes the audience is the legislature, especially if it is normative kind of research. As Professor Ranjan mentioned, that you have positivism and normativism, and what ought to be, the law could well be directed towards, the parliament and the legislature in formulating the what you call the right set of legal, norms. Now, knowing your audience is very important. And the reason is because if you are writing a technical article, an academic article, and if you are directing it to, for example, towards a set of parliamentarians, then that's a very wrong thing to do. For example, the reason why you have these policy briefs is precisely to take the crux of existing research available, write it in a systematic, non-technical manner, and present it to the legislature. Because if you give your one piece of research, published in a, maybe a great journal, but then, if it is really lacking in terms of conveying it to the parliamentarians or the legislature, then, it may not serve any purpose. I can remember my own, incident where, I wrote something on what is called as data exclusivity for pharmaceuticals, and at that point of time, the EU-India free trade negotiations were going on, and this was long back, and I had to send it to a parliamentarian. So what I did was I attached the piece of article, but I also wrote a covering letter briefly highlighting, what are the main, points that come out of this particular research. So if you want to, and later when I discuss pitching in your research after your publication, this would be very important that, you have to, try and see how to target it to specific audience, even when you publish a technical paper. So knowing the audience is very important. And then the goals of your paper. So most of the times, what we tend to do as researchers is sometimes repeat what is already there. So what is the original point, and how do we know it's an original point? You have to naturally identify, and as Professor Ranjan had mentioned, the gap in the literature. The literature gap is very important. If there is a gap in the literature and that gap is actually, it overlaps with your problem, then definitely you have a goal for your paper set. So now, well, there may be one paper may convey one point, a paper may convey more than one point, but definitely conveying some kind of original point and not repeating the materials is very important. Because if you look into your existing literature and you are trying to just give a descriptive picture, then it becomes a descriptive work, because then you are trying to say what other people have just said. So it will be important for you, keeping in mind, the goals of whatever research area you have, to contribute at least some novel points. In fact, I do some peer review for different journals from both India and abroad. And one of the criteria that the journals definitely need is there some original contribution? And, keeping in mind the various articles that have been cited, and they send it to the peer group, so that even if the author has missed some citations, then the peer group would, if they have read those articles, they would know better in terms of existence of other, kind of research, and whether the current article under review conveys an original point or not, then becomes important. And significant points, in accepting your, article for publication depends on the originality. Definitely there is a methodology, doctrinal, non-doctrinal, you want to do empirical, you have to have, that very clearly set. In legal research, for example, comparative law could be a useful methodology. In legal research also, there could be empirical research. There are certain authors in India and abroad who work on, Indian legal systems, and they do kind of, empirical research. But what we have seen broadly in India is the legal, research in terms of empirical, kind of approaches is largely descriptive, because we do not have that kind of training to do empirical research. And it would be very important, if you want to do empirical research that is data oriented, that you do not simply do descriptive research, but you end up, having, to understand what you call the statistical, systems. You can work on Stata or other kinds of what you call databases to understand how to make a regression analysis and come to specific conclusions. So otherwise, the legal methodology, as you know, would be in a very positivist kind of framework, would be, what is the law? Is there a law? Whether the law can be interpreted literally, whether if it cannot be interpreted literally, if there are more than one meanings, what are the interpretative techniques that you would use, and all these, basically relying on your primary sources and your secondary sources, you would come to a kind of doctrinal research. But empirical research in law and in other social sciences is a different ball game. So you have to be very clear on how you want to design your research methodology. Logic, reason, and critical thought is also important. Now, when we say logic, reason, and critical thought, it is, see, you may think about a particular issue logically, but when you write it, you may lose out on, because of the language constraints or because of other factors, you may not be able to convey what you want to. They always say that, you should mean what you say and you should say what you mean. So in that sense, if you are, say, for example, I was recently writing about a new bill that has been proposed, by the Competition Commission, to amend the Competition Act. And one of the provisions deals with, safe harbors for intellectual property. So I was trying to understand why this safe harbor is important. And here are some of the 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that could then lead to, kind of, analysis of what you call exposition on, what you want to write in the article. But it has to be logical in the sense that you can draw in from past research, you can draw in from what is happening currently, you can draw in from what the CCI or the competition authorities have done with reference to, non-application or not having such an IP safe harbor exception. So things like that. And whatever you write, it must have this logical, construction. It must be driven with reason and critical thought. It must have a structure. Now, if you have logic, reason, and if you do not have a structure, then the article will not be accepted. Because if you have, for example, let me tell you, I'll give you a practical example. There was a paper that I reviewed, for a journal, and the entire paper was revolving around patents and access to medicines. The technical part of the paper was fine, but in the conclusion, the author mentioned that you may want to look for insurance. And I was trying to find out from the entire discussion in the paper, where did the author discuss even the alternatives? And if the focus of the particular paper was not on alternatives between reducing prices for medicines and having an insurance system, then why should the author even mention the usefulness or the benefits of having a robust insurance system for dealing with the situation of lack of access to medicines? It would seem that the author has written something logically, but because there is no consistency, there is no coherence in terms of how the thought has been constructed, in terms of introduction, in terms of the structure. When you have your method of research, you have your original contribution done, and ultimately your conclusion should all be consistent. And the example that I gave you really tells you why it is so important. Citation, grammar, style. Now, the problem that most of us have is that this blue booking and other systems of citations are very painful. In fact, Judge Richard Posner, who is the judge of the appellate court in the United States, he once came up with a 2-page kind of citation method, and he said, burn the blue book. The title of the 2-page what you call citation system was burn the blue book. And why he said so is because this roughly 200 pages or 300 pages of blue book is completely trash. It complicates the system of citation and burdens the author into sort of using such citation systems, and completely a waste of time. However, some journals do demand blue booking. Some journals do demand Oscola citation method. And in such a situation, it would be important for us to sort of look into the citation system. Otherwise, what universities now generally prescribe is a uniform system. Whatever system you use, you should have it uniform in the entire paper or in the entire thesis. Grammar and style is also very important. Now, there can be various styles in which something can be written, But for example, in my opinion, that is not a kind of thing that you can use in an article, because then it becomes a kind of subjective pronoun. Or for example, the use of slangs, ain't, don't, isn't. So all those kind of things could be very well avoided. So there are some more things that I have noted in style. If students want, we can discuss a little more in detail. Academic ethics towards the end is also important. You have an article, you have iterations of the article, the final version. You want to know, whatever you have written, because sometimes what happens is, because you have read so much of materials, you might borderline something on what has already been said in the same way in which it is said, and then it becomes there is a chance that it could be plagiarized, even if you do not intentionally do it. If a particular passage is not cited, or if a particular passage is roughly an imitation of the other, then it could be barred for Turnitin, and that could create that would mean a lot of academic dishonesty. So the best way to do it is, there are now both open access and other kinds of websites like Turnitin that we use in our law school, for example, to find out whether a particular document is plagiarized. And in doing so, you must keep in mind that you do not upload the paper in the repository, because then whenever somebody uploads his or her paper, then they would have access to your work. So if you want to put something for publication, and before the publication you want to place it on Turnitin, see that you do not deposit in the repository of Turnitin. Otherwise, then the paper would be released even before you publish it. So finally, getting comments on your draft is important, because sometimes what happens is, you may be proficient in your area, but you would want to know that if you have missed out on some particular very important viewpoint, and if you want to improve on your article, it's always better to do it. You can upload your paper on SSRN and then share it with others, or you can send your papers and get early comments even before you pitch in for publishing. Sometimes what students do is, they send it to me, and then I give them some set of brief comments, and then they come back with the final versions. So this is how comments work. And pitching with a journal, now you have various kinds of journals, rankings. One of the things that I have noticed is that, for example, an intellectual property scholar writing for a health journal. Now, just because the area is pharmaceutical patents, however, if the entire focus of your paper was on patents and the complexity involving the patent system, then why is it important to pitch this article for the health journal? Now, the problem with this is that once you pitch it for the health journal, the peer group that looks into the articles that they receive in the health journal may not be intellectual property specialists, and that's why there could be a chance where something very obvious or trivial or even descriptive could get published in a health journal, while it could not mean any significant contribution to intellectual property research. So these are the kind of things that usually happen, wherein you write in a particular area, but you send it to a non-specialized journal, and such kind of research then is not valued. But however, for example, if that particular article of yours has an interdisciplinary bent, you are talking about health in terms of say access to medicines, and the kind of health laws and the interaction with the patent laws, well, those kind of things can definitely go into non-specialized journals. But if you're doing research, for example, on intellectual property, it would be important that you publish in the best journals involving intellectual property. Now, how to find out the rankings? There are various ways to do with it. Now, for example, for law students, there is Washington and Lee ranking system. You can log into Washington and Lee ranking system and find out which journals are specialized. Finally, post publication, getting your work notice. And why is it important? Because if you think you have made some significant contribution to your area, it is always important that the work gets cited and noticed. Now, you can say that, oh, I have it's already published, but what happens then if nobody takes notice of it? The problem in many cases would be, for example, your work, there are studies which show that if your work is published in open access, then there are higher chances of citation. Why? Because somebody who wants to have access to your article does not get access to your article. They will perhaps not want to try and find out and read and download it because they may not have access to it. So publications with open access journals, and not all open access journals are of good standards. You will have to do a kind of analysis of which journals are acceptable, which journals are good, and which journals are not, and then publish your work. Always publishing summaries of your work in blogs or other kinds of news articles would be helpful, because then I have seen, for example, my colleagues who write on bilateral investment treaties specifically makes a point to sort of get his research out through news magazines. Why? Because then you get cited and people know that this is an author who has done a lot of work. So getting citation and citing the work is a very important thing for academia, because citations can lead to kind of promotions in your jobs and stuff like that. So these are the broad things that I thought would be important for for academic publishing, academic writing. If there are further questions, let's take them. But I hope there is something that has been conveyed to you, and it is very fruitful use of your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was definitely a very fruitful and a very insightful session. We got to go through a very interesting PPT as well. So thank you for sharing powerful points as well as a very interesting PowerPoint presentation, sir. Taking into consideration the brevity of time, I would open the session for question and answers. I've seen that Ranjan sir has already answered a lot of questions. So I have a few handful of questions here. The first question is, what role does research methodology plays in the making of a good academic article? Do I essentially need to engage in first-hand or quantitative research for the paper to be wholesome?
So is this directed to somebody in particular, or both of us can give?
No, sir. In general, either of
okay.
you can answer the question.
Or maybe both of us can give very short.
Yes, yes.
Our own opinions.
Definitely, sir.
So
yes, sir,
again, it is a bit difficult to answer these questions, because we are not talking about research or publication or writing in a particular discipline and field. So we are cutting across disciplines, and that makes it very heterogeneous. Because as a legal writing, social science writing versus physical science, is a very different world. So there is no rule of thumb here, but on the larger role and importance of methodology, of course, it is extremely important, because unless you're doing a pure theoretical proposition or work, so kind of mathematical theory, or in my field, economists do some write economic models, theoretical models. If you're doing any kind of empirical work, then the method or the methodology overall becomes very important. So as I said, methodology is simply consistency between your research question, your worldview, what are you trying to figure out, and what you're what you're trying to what is your data points, what is your approach. So whether it is quantitative or qualitative, it does not matter in one sense, because both are valid methods, both are equally accepted in different disciplines, in different contexts. But yes, whether you use quantitative method will depend on, again, your question, your hypothesis, and the data you have, or the data you want to generate. Whereas qualitative research is equally valid, and it will depend on the kind of questions you have and what you want to answer. So this is a call which the researcher has to take, dependent on the question, dependent on the discipline, but largely on the importance, it is extremely important. Yogesh ji, maybe you want to. I think you have to unmute.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So I agree with what Professor Ranjan ji has said. There is no one standard way. It would definitely depend on your research question. See, there is a lot of value to doing all kinds of research. It's not that any particular kind of research is preferred over the other. But for example, if you want to convey something, say, normative, then definitely people would not just like to rely on your theories. They would also like to have data from the ground and try and understand the situation. For example, if you are writing, say, on something on specific law, they would want to know what industries get affected, what is their current market share, all those kind of things that could be useful for them to arrive at decisions. Well, theory kind of papers are good, for academic discussions, but generally it would depend on where you want to pitch and target your research.
So much, sir. There are a few questions that have been directed to Yogesh, sir. One of which is, what should be a typical structure of a legal research paper? So if you could answer this.
Okay, wonderful. So, see, generally all papers start with introduction, but what are the key things that you want to do in the introduction? I think Professor Ranjan's sir mentioned that there has to be an R factor. The what you start with is basically trying to say in few sentences what you want to do in the paper, right? So then you have section wise addressing. For example, if you want to address a particular problem in relation to, let me take my own example, one paper on patents and competition law. So if you want to examine the relationship, and if you are taking a comparative approach, then one of the sections would definitely be devoted to what is the position between in terms of the relationship between patents and competition law in the European Union and the United States. Then trying to look into what is the current position of law in India, what the CCI has that, and then specifically look into what are the things that you want to say with reference to what you call the particular goals of your paper. So depending on the methodology that you adopt, the structure of the paper can be different. However, having said that, as I mentioned, you should try, in your style, we should always try and use what are called, you should not use what are called as phrasal verbs. For example, things like call off, use of the word call off. So the appropriate use of the word would be to cancel. Or for example, look up. Instead of using the word look up, to find. Also use, as I mentioned, IV, those have to be avoided. You should not have any, contraction. For example, it will, you don't say it and then apostrophe and then ill. So all those things have to be avoided. So in terms of your, structure, the structure should have a kind of flow from the introduction to the conclusion. If there is no flow, and if you are writing 4 articles in one, that is the one common problem that we tend to do, that we have so much to say and we don't know that there could be 4 different articles or 2 different articles from the things that you want to say. So always try and see how much can be said in that particular article. Don't overdose, this problem I have faced. For example, I was writing this research paper for one of the fellowships, early fellowships that I did, and then the thing was that I was trying to compress 4 issues: the consistency of Indian law with international law as one, the consistency between Indian law and the constitution as another. So all these things in one paper just doesn't make sense. Then I was told to sort of make 2 or 3 different papers. So that's the kind of thing that you have to always keep in mind. The structure should be in a way in which it leads the problem to the solution, and whatever research methodology you adopt, maybe the comparative one, then do it in that style and in that specific sections. So it always has to answer that critical question as to one or more questions, but then you should never combine 2 or 3 papers into one. Mandated to
Thank you
include.
so much, sir.
Yeah.
So there's another question. Uh, as is it necessary for a paper to be based purely upon contemporary or recent issues for definite publication or for high chances of publication? What is the scope for more abstract pieces in the world of academic writing?
Take a quick stab at it. If I understood right, again, if you're doing theoretical, you're making theoretical contribution to the literature, right? You have to understand. Then these are usually not, bound by space and time, so to say, in the sense that these are ideas. You're talking to an audience which is interested in general principles. Now, those general principles, will be relevant, across time usually. But if you're doing more empirical based paper, you try to validate a certain theoretical proposition, or you want to explain an observed phenomena, right? Then they are usually more topical, they are more relevant, they are around what you observe. So the other side of it is that most of good theory, most of good general principles actually have come from observations of the world around you, right? You look at history of science, you look at history of social science. People have tried to see problem around and then try to explain that, and they turn out to be classic general principles which are validated by hundreds of other studies, and they end up becoming theory. So uh, one of my uh, gurus in the field of economics is Ronald Coase. And he wrote his last book when he was 103 years old. So you can imagine, he was, of course, a Nobel Prize winner in economics and one of the greatest minds in the last century. One of his last interviews he gave when he was 100 or 101 year old, he just said, what should a good researcher do, a young researcher do? And he was very old, already past 100. He just looked around, he just said very easily, a good researcher, just look around yourself, find a problem, and try to explain it. Yogesh?
Yeah. So I just wanted to show, for example, this is a book. I hope everybody can see this, right? So this is a book written by a lawyer, okay, and a dear friend of mine, Prashant Reddy, on intellectual property. And what he does in this book, there is nothing to say. For example, if a lawyer reads it, okay, there would not be any legal principle that has been argued in this book, okay. But this book is tells you a lot about history of intellectual property law in India. So basically, it's a historical work on intellectual property law and how the laws evolved and what India did when it signed the TRIPS agreement. So it has not argued anything with reference to how the court has interpreted, whether the interpretation was good, bad. It just explains how the law has evolved. And a simple contribution like this, and this has been published by Oxford University Press. It was very painstaking, because he had to file several RTIs to get through all the kind of materials, and because historical research requires archival access. You have to have sort of consistency with reference to going and slogging for hours and hours in dusty libraries trying to find out and in some ways, when it looks like legal research on day to day stuff that comes out, and trying to articulate whether a particular judgment the court argued it right or wrong, the court came to the right conclusions, may seem easier. So depending on the type of research, no research, whether it's contemporary or non-contemporary historical, is less meaningful. It always provides meaning, provided that nobody has done it.
Yes.
If there was a book already written on the history of intellectual property, an elaborate one, then it would be absolutely futile for him to have written this. That's why, doing proper research and finding out whether such books exist or not is an important thing. And the next thing is, this book was not pitched just for the legal academy. If you open this book and read, it directs towards, kind of people who may be economists, who may be policy makers and opinion, makers, for them to understand how the law has evolved. And that kind of contribution, I think, is also very significant, even if does not, have anything to do with legal principles per se. I hope that clarifies.
So thank you so much. There's another question. It goes, can the research questions be similar to previous researches, however you are applying them into an entirely new geographical location with respect to subject history? Is this plagiarism?
No, very quickly. Again, research question can be similar. So, as I said, you can have one particular context, you can have one particular problem, and you can have multiple explanations. So, research question could be similar, but your answer could be different, right? But you have to present that. You have to say, it should not be a copying, and then it becomes plagiarism. So many of the times, you do replication studies, you do validation studies, where you take a certain research question, which was, let's say, what are the factors which influence farmers to participate in cooperatives in Ghana, for example, right? In farmer agricultural cooperatives. So that's the research question. You can have the same question. What are the factors which influence farmers to participate in farmer cooperatives in agricultural cooperatives in India, or in a particular context in India? That could be in a particular context in Ghana. Questions are similar, but your contexts are different, right? So what will apply in Ghana may not apply in India. But you have to say that upfront, that we are doing we are inspired by this field and body of research, because we feel that this posing these same questions, picking up from the existing knowledge, and that is the literature review part, will help us answer some of the questions here. You test that. So what you find is that, okay, out of 5 factors which were applicable in Ghana, 3 are applicable in India. You report that. But then you have 3 other different reasons which probably were not applicable in Ghana, or they are new, which you found for the case of India. And that is your contribution. So you can do it. Yeah. But you have to cite and you have to refer. For every sentence you're writing, you have to refer. Any fact you're presenting, which is based on previous work, you have to give the reference and citation. That is honest work. And if you're copying something, you have to ensure they are under quotes, and the specific citation of the page number and the paper, the year has to be given in that. That's perfectly fine. Sorry, Yogesh.
Yeah, so I agree with what has been said. For example, let me give you an anecdote. So Canada has this doctrine, in its patent law, a particular doctrine which allows it to reject patent, and this was created by the judiciary. There was no statutory, requirement to have this doctrine in the Canadian patent law. The judiciary created it. Canada applied it for roughly 20 to 30 years, until a couple of years back, Canadian Supreme Court said that this, judicial doctrine which was created by the lower courts, does not stand the test of, what the patent system is, as to how it has evolved statutorily. Having said that, in India, the same doctrine has been applied, but the doctrine has not been created by the judiciary. It has been created by virtue of the statute. There is a provision in the law which allows it to apply such a doctrine. Now, could the Indian judiciary then, for example, overrule the doctrine, saying that, this is there in the statute, but we are going to overrule it anyway without any rhyme or reason? There could be differences in circumstances between how legal systems evolve, specifically for legal researchers, and the ways in which particular doctrines withstand a test of legality in specific jurisdictions. So the questions may be the same, the application of the same doctrine in different countries, and depending on how they have historically evolved.
But sir, we would take the last question for this session. It goes as, can you please throw some light upon reliability of writing softwares in context of creating a structure, grammar, etc. for an academic article?
Maybe Yogesh ji, you take this. Because
I
I hardly
I
use
have not
any.
used one. I have not used one.
Same here. I mean, see, maybe, as maybe this question is relevant for undergraduate, postgraduate students, I can understand. But, and maybe I think you're referring to Grammarly or sort of those kind of softwares. I don't have any personal experience with that, and I'm sure it's useful in certain contexts, especially for those who are not, very ingrained or not yet very expert with the English language, because that is, whether we like it or not, is the universal scientific language. But the larger point I would say is that if you're a good researcher and you want to become a successful researcher, academician, scholar in your life, then even if you start with some support of writing softwares, eventually you have to grow bigger than that. You have to grow out of it, and you have to become an independent communicator. That is absolutely essential. So that is non-negotiable in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say on this because I haven't used any such softwares. But naturally, if you have certain what you call basic writing skills, and those skills develop over a period of time, definitely, I don't think you would have to rely on these
Absolutely.
softwares. So the best thing perhaps is to do is, even before starting to think about publishing, in a journal, first write for yourself and try and see what you write in a page makes sense to you or not. And if it does make sense to you, even if you, and give it for correction for to someone, or put it on the software that you want to, and find out whether it has been written. But using the software for your for improving your language skill, I think that's not the right approach. The right approach is from from you to software, and software being the kind of validator.
Absolutely. I think the parallel could be, maybe it's not precise, but the parallel could be that, using calculators to, learn mathematical calculations. I mean, we all grew up with our parents, trying to dissuade us from using calculators. You see, because we can use that to support and, to support to some extent, but that should not handicap us. We have to grow out of that, and we have to become independent of that on our own standing.
Thank you so much, sir. I extend my gratitude to both the speakers today. It was, in fact, a very, very interesting, grasping, and thought-stimulating session. Now we are towards the end of our entire workshop, so I would take liberty and extend my vote of thanks. It's said that no duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks. I, on behalf of Think India, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all our speakers for gracing us with a very interesting and thought-stimulating address, and for making this workshop a success. I thank all the participants for their overwhelming support and presence, and we look forward to their participation in future as well. I finally thank our entire team for all their hard work. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Ranjan sir. Thank you, Yogesh sir, for giving us your valuable time, and for gracing us in this workshop. And I thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.